This book, our Constitution, protects our society and empowers us to govern. The protea leaves are us, the people, who freely elect our voices in Parliament. The drum calls the people of Parliament, through whom we govern together. And the sun is our country, healing our past, improving our lives, and energizing our potential. Together, our Constitution, our people, our Parliament, and our country are building our great South African nation. Parliament TV, Channel 408 on DSTV.
Dumelang, a very warm welcome to you, our viewers, and we're coming to you live from Parliament TV studio, right here in the heart of the parliamentary precinct. My name is Tepo Mori, and it's both an honor and a pleasure to be joined in studio by one of Parliament's presiding officers, the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, Dr. Annelie Lotriet. Now, Parliament is the cornerstone of South Africa's constitutional democracy. It consists of two houses, the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces, each with a vital role in lawmaking, oversight and public representation. The National Assembly is led by the Speaker, who is supported by the Deputy Speaker. Together, they preside over proceedings, uphold the rules of the House, and ensure that debates are conducted in an orderly and democratic manner. So stay with us. Join the conversation on our social media platforms at Parliament of RSA. Let us know what you think as we count down on one of the most defining moments of the parliamentary calendar, live here on Parliament TV, DSTV channel 408. Of course, it is your Parliament, your voice, your future. I mentioned earlier that today we are with Dr. Annelie Lotriet, who is originally from Johannesburg and has a strong background in both academia and politics. She was a professor at the University of the Free State, where she championed multilingualism and helped train interpreters for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now, in 2000, she entered public service as a ward councillor in Mangaung and later became a member of Parliament in 2009. In 2024, she made history as the first deputy speaker from an opposition party since 1996. Now, of course, our conversation will begin here on DSTV channel 408 with Deputy Speaker of the 7th Democratic Parliament of the Republic of South Africa, Dr. Annelie Lotriet. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, and I appreciate the invitation.
Now, of course, we're going to start with the journey, how it all became, how you came here. We did mention in our introduction that you have a strong background in academia, politics. Let's start with, who is Dr. Annelie Lotriet? Where did you grow up? How it was then, and the journey before the politics, before the status, and being a member of Parliament?
Okay, well, we have to go back quite a few years, which gives away my age. So I grew up in Johannesburg, born and raised, went to school there. Yes, and always from even school, I had an active interest in politics. And in those days, you know, in the 70s, politics in South Africa was very, you know, dynamic. We sat with apartheid regime. We had, you know, all the challenges that we faced. You know, so that was very much part of my life. Was understanding what is happening in South Africa. Yeah. And I think that to a large extent influenced my thinking. You know, I was at school in the 70s, high school in 76. I was a these days, grade 11 learner.
Yes.
So yes, it was very topical. That was my age. So from there I went on to university, studied originally I thought I'm going to be a teacher.
Oh.
So I studied languages and then a teacher's diploma, and then I went on with postgrad in teaching, higher education, did my doctorate. And yes, I was a school teacher for 2 years, and then we moved to Bloemfontein, and then I became a Free Stater.
Ooh.
And that is where I went into academia.
And when then, as a former professor, of course, what inspired your move then from academia to full-time politics, and what motivated that decision to take public office in 2009?
Well, as I say, I've always been interested in politics, even from school, and in our house, my father was also very politically interested and not necessarily active because he was a schoolmaster, headmaster. So we talked a lot of politics. So it was almost natural because even at university I was involved in student politics and served on the SRC. So it was always there in the back of my mind. But you first have to get a career and, you know, you get married, you have children. And then around about 2000, with a new situation, with the first real local government elections, I thought, well, why not? Let's give it a go.
Yeah.
And I stood and I won the ward. So yes, that's where it started.
And with it then, Doc, how has then your academic background, sort of, particularly in language and linguistics and education, how has that then shaped your approach to political leadership and policy making now?
I think the fact that I understand the importance of language, you know, that you are or you exist within your language and everything that goes with the language. It is not only a means of communication.
Yeah.
We're both sitting here using not our first languages.
Of course.
But we are, our whole being is built on our language, our culture. It's what you think, what you dream. And therefore, I think it's very good in politics. If you open yourself up to that important part of everyone's life. So I think it's stood me in good stead.
And tell us about how your experience then as a ward councillor has sort of shaped your approach and also shaped the way you approach things now as a member of parliament and now, of course, as a deputy speaker of the National Assembly.
I think it's a very important place to start in politics, is to be involved in local government. That's where you really meet the voters.
Yeah.
If you come in on a provincial or a national level, you're not really in touch with the voters in the sense that you interact with them on a daily basis. When you're a ward councillor specifically, you deal with the voters, where they live, the problems they have, where they live. And I think that to me is one of the important things. If you want a career in politics, start there so that you know what politics is all about. You get to know the inside of people's needs and what politics is. But I know today it often happens that people come from, without ever going into local government politics, they start immediately in a legislature.
Of course.
And I think that's something that's always missing.
And then with that, Doc, as someone who transitioned then from leading a university department to serving Parliament, what were some of the biggest challenges or surprises, rather, in those two different environments? What is it that you found really surprising or challenges as you transitioned into Parliament?
Well, I realized it's two different worlds because when I was a ward councillor, I was still lecturing.
Oh, okay.
So I had both, and in our political dispensation, except if you're a member of the mayoral committee, you are part-time. So you had to balance that. So you had some idea of what politics is, but when you go into politics full-time and you go to Parliament, it is a totally different world. A lot of challenges. All of a sudden you have a portfolio, even just your practical things such as your life, because I'm not from Cape Town, I'm from the Free State, so it's all of a sudden your whole family life is disrupted, so you commute during the week. So it's a lot of things that you have to get used to and adapt to. But even the hard politics that you're exposed to, all of a sudden you're in the middle of it. And you firsthand experience opposition politics. Ooh. Because I entered as a member of the opposition.
Yes.
And so, yes, that's it. You had to learn very quickly.
Of course. Now, of course, you championed multilingualism and interpreter training for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now, it's been over 30 years, right, since that, and since Parliament passed a law authorizing the formation of the Truth and Reconciliation System. Now, the TRC was formed to deal with the atrocities of apartheid. You mentioned that you grew up in that era, right, and you're very cognizant of what was happening at the time, and it's some of the things that shaped your idea of what should happen and what shouldn't happen. Now, with that, what was it working in the TRC, and did that experience have anything to do with the decision to go into politics full time?
Well, I'm very glad I had that experience. I think that was an eye-opener. Even though I grew up in that era, you didn't know a tenth of what was really happening in the country. And I think that to me really was almost a watershed in terms of how we view South Africa.
Yeah, yeah.
And the things that happened. I cannot look at it from a distance. Yeah. I heard those experiences firsthand, and the thing with interpreting is that you interpret what that person says, but you have to deal with it because you have to put it into another language. So it's not just a mechanical process, that's one part. But you have to convey the emotion.
Yeah.
You have to make sure that what you are interpreting, that it is conveyed in such a way that that real meaning, the real pain is in fact conveyed. So that was very stressful, emotionally draining. After a day, you were dead tired. You know, so we as interpreters often afterwards spoke, because I was the main trainer.
Yeah.
So I had the dual role of training those interpreters and then also being an interpreter. And I think what people don't understand is that when we started with that whole process, it was all in simultaneous interpreting from the booths, like we have in Parliament.
Yeah.
But up to then in South Africa, that didn't exist.
Oh.
You had court interpreters. So we had to start from scratch within, I think, a period of 6 weeks.
Wow.
We had to recruit people, train them, prepare them emotionally for, and we didn't know what was going to happen. So I know my first interpreting sessions was at the first amnesty hearing. So that was also very traumatic. I know many of the interpreters actually experienced some of those incidents themselves. So, no, that really was one of the most important experiences in my whole life.
Yeah, and it did have an effect on your decision to join politics?
Not so much directly, but it did have an impact on how I see politics and how I see the future of the country.
Now, with that then, in your view, how has Parliament evolved since you first joined in 2009? And what are some of the notable changes that stand out for you?
Well, when I joined 2009, it was a different Parliament. It was, I think, just the whole atmosphere, the tone of Parliament. It was a very respectful environment. We had a wonderful speaker, Max Sisulu, who I really admire. And yes, it was a contestation of ideas. So I'm very glad I had those 5 years.
Yes.
And then obviously it changed since 2014, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because I think more voices are being heard, more views, approaches on politics and what it is. And I think that's basically a sign of democracy, a growing democracy. But it has changed dramatically. And you know, you get your ups and downs before an election, and the year before an election, things get very rough. And then it just settles down again. So I know that we're now heading for 2026 local government elections. So obviously the tension increases. But yes, we have a very vibrant, challenging, difficult parliament. I think if we compare it to parliaments across the world, yes, we have our unique way.
And of course then, how has your experience in the opposition then shaped your understanding of the workings of Parliament, and how does it inform your current leadership role?
Well, if you're in opposition, you always feel that everyone is against you and you're not getting your way. That's part of the whole thing. So yes, I think it's very good that you do come from the opposition, and that you then in that position of being part of the presiding officers, because you understand the frustrations, because you've been there. I think it's more difficult if you've been in government for since you came here. You have one view, this is how it is, but if you come from the opposition, you have different views. So I think that's what I'm also trying to do, is to try and accommodate the different views, and also in the different functions I do have, to try and not change Parliament, that one can't necessarily do, but to bring new perspectives into the position I hold.
Now the conversation continues with the Deputy Speaker of the 7th Democratic Parliament of the Republic of South Africa, Dr. Annelie Lotriet, right here on Parliament TV, your window to the custodian of democracy. Stay tuned.
I would like to, as Viwe Gwachube from the Democratic Alliance, nominate Dr. Annelie Lotriet for the position of the Deputy Speaker, please.
I wish to congratulate you on your election, Honorable Lotriet, as Deputy Speaker. You now have the opportunity of addressing the House for a few minutes as an expression of your honor on being elected.
Honorable Speaker, Justice, Mr. President, honourable members and guests. Madam Speaker, I would firstly want to congratulate you on your election. I can assure you of my support, and I wish you strength, courage and wisdom. This is a tremendous honour and privilege, as well as a great responsibility that has been bestowed on me. This is a position that I do not take lightly, and I fully understand the trust that has been placed in me. I undertake to fulfill my duties with care, commitment, and humility, and to be fair and just, and to do all in my power to do justice to this position. I would like to thank you for your trust that you have placed in me, and I undertake that I will do everything not to disappoint you, and that we will make this 7th Parliament the best Parliament ever, and that we will work for the interest of the people of this country. I thank you so much.
A momentous occasion at the opening at the first sitting of the National Assembly last year. And of course, you're still watching Parliament TV, DSTV channel 408, and we are still in studio with the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, Dr. Annelie Lotriet. Now, building on that perspective, we've already spoken about the journey that has led Dr. Annelie Lotriet to the position that she is at the moment. And of course, now we're going to deal with the mandate and her role as the Deputy Speaker in one of the august houses of Parliament, which is the National Assembly. DS, Of course, now we have focused on the journey, where you've come from, academics, and how that has led and shaped your journey into being the Deputy Speaker. We saw you at the sitting, and you made your opening remarks, and you welcomed the nomination and the election. Now, since 2009, first joining Parliament, tell me, did you ever have this? Was this a goal? Did you think that you'd be the Deputy Speaker?
No, it was never something that I thought, oh, I want to be there.
Yeah.
It's one of those things, when you're elected as an MP, you try and do the best within the portfolio that you're given. So I held a few positions within my party caucus, so that of the caucus chair, the Deputy Chief Whip, so that was to me very challenging, exciting, fulfilling. So when the election happened and we got the results, things started changing.
Yeah.
So then new cards were put on the table and there were different possibilities. So yes, I think I was very privileged to be asked, well, could we nominate you?
Yeah.
So yes, that was not something that I necessarily had in mind and aspired to. But yes, I think that is something that you know, after that many years in Parliament, is a good place to be.
And take us through the emotions while sitting there, while the voting process was going on. What was going through your mind?
Well, it started off early that morning because at that point, you will remember there was no agreement between the different parties. We didn't know what was going to happen. In fact, when we sat there whilst being sworn in, we still didn't know. So the tension was incredible. So we then had the sort of, okay, if it goes this way, we'll vote that. You know, so everything was up in the air. So what was going through my mind was just you know, where are we? Everyone was just watching their phones. You know, so yeah, it was one of those things. And when it happened and said, okay, there is a deal, you sort of just go with the flow.
You
don't know what's going to happen.
Now, with that then, now your role as the Deputy Speaker in the National Assembly, I think a lot of people, like I said, we have a certain perspective of what Parliament is, what the National Assembly is. Let's delve into what your role entails and the significance of your role as the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly.
Well, I think I would want to start off by saying that, you know, my own perception of a Deputy Speaker or a presiding officer was that what you see, sitting in the chair and presiding, I didn't have a real idea of what it actually entails, and I quickly had to learn that it's very much a management role, administrative role. So my tasks beside presiding are all the responsibilities that have been delegated to me by the Speaker. So I have a variety of things I take responsibility for. One of them is PARMED, the medical aid for members of Parliament and legislatures and judges, where I am the chairperson of the board. So that is a very important role to fulfill, to, you know, those fiduciary duties that you have to make sure that the fund is solvent, etc. And then I also have, and we've referred to it quite extensively, which was sort of a full circle that came to me, was the languages, language services, language policy, the interpreting, translation. So I think that's the one thing that I was well suited for because of my background. Then I also have the ICT in Parliament, which falls under me. So I'm co-chair of the ICT Forum, where we look at, you know, your communication technology, which is very important these days with all the latest developments. We also sit with a new build that we have. We have to make sure that we have the best technology there is for our members and for the public. Then I also, obviously, I serve in the Rules Committee, the Programming Committee. I also have the responsibility of former members. We still have to look at how we're going to do that, because it's also important that former members stay in touch with Parliament. And then capacity building for members, which is a crucial function Members come here, but you're also not really geared or have the necessary capacity, because you very seldom know exactly what you encounter when you come from private life, civil society, into Parliament. So it's important to do capacity training because of the different expectations, the functions of MPs. So that is also one of my responsibilities. So it's a whole plethora of things that I have to do.
And not just order members.
No, that's a small part of it, yes.
And of course then, since 1996, you're the first person to be the Deputy Speaker from the opposition side. What does that mean for you in your view, especially in terms of the future of South Africa?
I think it was a very exciting moment because it has shown that democracy is very alive in our country. So I take that responsibility, that being the first from an opposition party, I have that responsibility to show that it is indeed worthwhile and that we can make a difference. And I hope that this augurs well for our future elections.
And with that then, of course, it's almost a year now since you've been in your position. What has your experience then been as Deputy Speaker, especially under the Government of National Unity?
Well, it's one of those situations that you don't have previous experiences to rely on. So we learn as we go. And you will know that the GNU is not always plain sailing, doesn't always go very smoothly. So there are lots of difficult points that you have to navigate. But you have to stick to what you do and do your work as best as you can, regardless of all the different things that happen, like budgets that don't get passed and things like that. So that's part of the learning process, the process of developing our democracy.
Now, you spoke about ensuring that the use of technology is done and innovation, and you're actively involved in these initiatives as such as training and capacity building for MPs as well. Now, in your view, how does these efforts help shape a more inclusive, a more responsive and future-oriented Parliament?
I think one of the main things that we have to start focusing on, because it is now part of our lives and we can't escape it, is artificial intelligence. It is going to change, I think, the face, the nature of politics. I think our interaction with the public, it will definitely have an impact. How we communicate with one another. So that to me is one of the main things that we have to look at. I know that we've been focusing on the fourth industrial revolution, but I think it has developed so quickly that we must make sure that we don't fall behind and that we know what the dangers are. I was also the keynote speaker at such a webinar, and I think this is something that as Parliament we have to focus on, because it is going to dictate how we do business in future.
And you play a key role in driving Parliament's e-strategy. Could you tell us more about what this involves and why it is so important?
Well, I think this also links to the artificial intelligence. So our e-strategy is absolutely to look at what we have in Parliament. How can we improve, and this is I also said in the past that this is now where I have to go against my own personal preferences, because I like paper and books. I have to make peace with it. We have to go digital and Parliament will have to do that, not only for saving the environment, but also just in terms of time and capacity. So these are things that we have to focus on. So it's a very exciting world out there, and one that I think Parliament can take the lead in.
And do you then think that Parliament's e-strategy will then bridge the gap between citizens and representatives, and especially in terms of communication and ensuring that their needs and their the things that bother, that the challenges that they face on a daily basis are being heard and are being represented in Parliament?
Yes, I think so. If we look at the whole thing of, for example, petitions, if that's done electronically, it's quickly accessible. You don't have to wait for thousands of signatures, someone going and writing letters. Everything can be done electronically. It can be stored. It can be dealt with, you can sort it, so it will just speed up processes. And I think that's one of the criticisms that the public have had, is that it's so slow. You know, we sit with petitions that go back years. So hopefully an e-environment can change that.
Now with that, DS, you spoke about language policy and how you form part of it, and how it was sort of like a full circle moment, especially with your background. Now, could you tell us more then about Parliament's language policy and how it could be strengthened to remain relevant and effective in today's multilingual and digital era?
Well, firstly, I have to stress that multilingual environment is extremely important. I can see in the House, when members speak in their first language, it's a different person.
Yes.
Much more passionate. They express themselves much better. But we sit with a situation that, you know, we are multilingual, but we sometimes just need a language to connect.
Yeah.
Therefore, your interpreting services are critical. But then it is the fight to make people understand that it costs money. And unfortunately, I don't think everyone understands it. That if you want a quality multilingual situation in Parliament, you will have to budget for that.
Yeah, yeah.
So that is one place where you cannot cut. So in Parliament, we have the interpreting services. Obviously, one would love to have interpreting facilities in our committee meetings as well, but it's all about capacity and funding. Then our translation services, I think this is something where we can start looking into AI, because the kind of language we use, the phrases we use, they're basically standard.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think we should start investigating that. But then also I think very much training and capacity building within the language environment within Parliament. Because I think one of the main things, what makes us also a unique Parliament, is the fact that we do provide for the official languages in the country.
Yeah. And of course, earlier you alluded to the fact that you delivered a keynote address in one of the launch of the webinar series on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And there you mentioned that laws have been unable to keep pace in rapid technological developments, and that most AI operations in South Africa remain unregulated. Now, given the transformative nature of the Fourth Industrial Revolution technologies, what immediate steps would you then think Parliament should take to close this legislative gap and ensure that we don't fall behind, especially when it comes to safeguarding the rights of the citizens?
Absolutely. I think that is the one aspect where we have to pay more attention, is our legislation. Cybersecurity, the use of AI. Those are the things that we have to focus on. So I think there needs to be a focus from the relevant portfolio committees on legislation, because otherwise we do fall behind, and you have this disconnect between the legislation, protection of everyone, because with this wonderful innovation comes a lot of dangers.
Of course.
And you can only protect that through legislation. And I think it's not only in our country, I think it's a worldwide issue, to really have proper legislation that keeps up to date, because it's such a quickly changing environment that you will have to keep your legislation updated.
Now, with that then, you also referred to a chilling expert hearing, right, at the Interparliamentary Union Assembly about autonomous weapons systems and how decisions on life and death are shifting from humans to opaque algorithms. Now, how should South Africa's Parliament then respond to such ethical dilemmas in AI and automation?
I think how we should respond is on a multifaceted way. I think transversal across the different portfolio committees is relevant to that, because that is in terms of defence. We will have to have those safeguards, also in terms of the ethics of everything. So I think the days are gone that we can work in silos. Everything is being interconnected, and I think that Parliament and the different committees will have to start taking that kind of approach, that much of that kind of legislation will have to go across the different portfolio committees.
And then lastly, with regards to the parliamentary capacity and scientific literacy then, your speech highlights the need for MPs to be trained to become science literate. And in order to legislate effectively, of course, within the fourth industrial revolution era. Now, what practical initiatives then, of course, or partnerships are in place? You spoke about collaboration now. What partnerships then are now in place, or being considered rather, to build this kind of capacity among members?
Yes, what we're doing at the moment is to look at the different options. There are different courses at universities. We're also now looking at, for example, getting assistance from the CPA, which we are a member of, in terms of AI. So that I think this is one field internationally that where we can really exchange ideas, because we all sit with the same problem. So that's what we will be doing, working with international partners and our local universities to provide the capacity to our members.
Now, we've summarized the blast from the past, and now we've spoken about the importance of ensuring that we use technology and new innovations to ensure that policy making and lawmaking is more transformed. Now, back to home soil. On May the 27th, 2025, President Cyril Ramaphosa answered questions from the National Assembly members, and the Deputy Speaker presided over part of the sitting. Now, members raised points of orders, expressed their views, and some reservations. Let's take a look.
Honourable Lotriet, I have been cautioning you a number of times. Now I'm asking you because you are ignoring and disrespecting the chair. Honourable Lotriet, I have asked you to please leave the chamber. Honourable Dagmore, you are not assisting. Honourable members, I will indeed refer this matter to the Speaker for referral to the powers and privileges for every member who was in contempt of the rules of this House, the procedures of this House, and the respect for the presiding officer. I will also refer it in terms of Rule 69, which is very specific and which the Powers and Privileges Act refers to. That will be done. We will now proceed. Honourable Tandu.
Thank you.
We are now proceeding because you are now interfering with other members' right to ask questions.
So thank you, Deputy Chair. I think I'd like to first begin by expressing my appreciation for your ability to self-correct, because it means you have considered now that the presence of those strangers here was wrong. The challenge now that exists is that you removed members of parliament in defense of those strangers. Can we allow members of parliament who were raising the issue that you have now conceded to return to the House so we can return to the normal business of this? They were removed in defense of those people.
Honourable Member, no.
Gone.
Honourable Member.
Members of parliament return to the House.
I removed them because they showed contempt for the presiding officer. That is why they were removed.
Contempt for the presiding officer. And you're still watching Parliament TV. And that was Deputy Speaker Dr. Annelie Lotriet in action, fulfilling her duties as the presiding officer during those House proceedings on the 27th of May 2025, where the President was scheduled to answer questions. Now, of course, proceedings were delayed for over half an hour following objections raised by members of the economic freedom fighters who questioned the presence of personal protectors in the public area of the chamber. Now, the session ended before all scheduled questions could be answered. Yes, one of the biggest things that you have to do, of course, as part of your responsibility and role is to preside over the proceedings of the House. Now, with that, can you just share your perspective on the disruption that unfolded and what guided your decision in handling the situation at the time?
Yes, when we preside in the House, there are different things we take into consideration. We have the rules of Parliament, we have the relevant legislation, which is the Powers and Privileges and Immunities Act, and you have to balance all of that. Now, very important there is that members may raise points of order. That is in the rules. There are strict stipulations in terms of what points of order may be raised. And members do push the boundaries. That just happens. So that's part of it. But the moment it gets into a situation where you're now infringing on the rights of other members, then you have to take action.
Yeah.
So we had a situation there where the president was there, members have submitted their questions, they've made the effort to do that, they're expecting answers, because we don't see the president that often.
Yeah.
So I have to protect their right as well. So you cannot have a group of members taking that right away. So that was the balance that I had to try and protect.
And with that, of course, I mean, a lot of people, South Africans, will say, politics, you know. And the moment things get robust, that's the moment that you're like, let's turn on the volume, things are going on here, you know. It's interesting, to say the least. Now, when members raise objections in this way, how do you then, as the presiding officer, weigh their right to raise concerns against the need to maintain order, the decorum of the House, and ensure that the business of Parliament continues as well?
Yes, that's the balance. That is the challenge that you do have, because you have to listen to that point of order, adjudicate whether it is in terms of the rules, because very often members just raise something because they feel like it, frivolous. Then you have to determine whether that is in fact a valid point of order and rule on that. Then it gets to a point where a member will disrespect the ruling, which is against the rules, and then they will disrespect the authority of the chair, which is also against the rules, and then you have to rule on that. So it's a whole chain of thought that you have to go through to get to the point, because that is the extreme where you ask a member to leave the chamber. The ideal is that we take a point of order, because we do have free speech, and members who have spoken also have free speech, but it must be in line with the rules, within the decorum of the House, and within the powers and privileges, because you do have immunity to say certain things, but you can't say anything you want.
And of course then for viewers, I mean, when you are watching, you'll have members that are saying, but Deputy Speaker, you're being unfair, you know. Please explain to the viewers then, are these decisions that you make alone, or do you have advisors around you with regards to which rule fits where and which rule is appropriate where?
In the House itself, if I decide I will rule on it immediately, that is my decision there. But I can also refer it. I can say, well, I will consult the unrevised Hansard and come back with a ruling, which we regularly do, because you might just have missed a bit of what was said, and just to make absolutely sure that you heard correctly. But if you're quite sure that is totally out against the rules or within the rules, then you can sustain it or you can disregard it.
Yeah. Now, of course, then the session ended without all the questions being answered, including those that were directed at the President. Now, what are then the implications of this for Parliament's oversight role, and how should such situations be handled in the future?
It's very serious because members are protected. And in terms of the Powers and Privileges Act, I think it's Section 7, no one may prevent a member from doing his work. And that was indeed not doing your work or preventing members from doing their work. So as Parliament, we will look at how can we accommodate that, because we also have to understand that an oral question is different from a written question. In an oral situation, you get your answer and you have follow-up questions, which is based on the answers given. You cannot have that with a written question. So you deny the members that opportunity. So we will have to look at how can we accommodate them. But the ideal is that people should respect the House.
And of course then the biggest issue at the time was the presence of personal protectors within the chamber. Now, in your view, how should such security-related concerns be raised and addressed then appropriately with regards to the rules of the House and the committees that are in place for these?
Yes, I think the appropriate way would be, because it was nothing wrong with raising the point in the House. I also inquired why are they sitting there? I was informed that is part of the gallery, just not clearly demarcated. And then I conveyed that to the members. Now, usually that would be then the end of the story. I have replied, but then members kept on and on. Now, in terms of things such as security, those are matters that should be raised within the Rules Committee. Now, members use the House as a platform
Yes.
to get the point across because it's on the media. But the ideal place or the correct place is in the Rules Committee.
Now, did this experience offer you any new insights into the relevance, especially, or the application of the rules, especially within the context of a relatively new 7th Parliament?
The rules are critical. You cannot do the work without the rules.
Yeah.
Because we have to make sure everyone respects each other. We have to respect the citizens of this country
Yeah.
because we serve them. So we're not there as entertainers.
Yes.
We have work to do, and we must make sure that we have everything to do our work in the correct way, and therefore you have the rules.
And even though it might be riveting and exciting for others to watch, of course you do have other viewers that feel that they're losing confidence in Parliament, that the work is not being done. What can Parliament then do to ensure and restore confidence in citizens when they are watching Parliament and engaging within Parliament engagement?
That's one of the very difficult things because it has now been for, I think, the last 2 terms that people say that Parliament has become a circus. And that's true. That's the honest perception of people.
Yeah.
And we're not doing much to disabuse them of that idea. So I think as Parliament, we must really do some introspection as to why we're there, how we can serve people in the best way, and look at our rules perhaps again.
Yeah.
And then I think also training,
Yes.
exposure, in terms of your real function and why you are there.
Now, the conversation continues with the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, Dr. Annelie Lotriet. And of course, it is June month in South Africa, and a time when we honor the bravery of the 1976 generation that stood up, right? Now, of course, with that, we're going to have a conversation with regards to Youth Month and how Dr. Annelie Lotriet has a perspective on that and how such issues such as unemployment, that is an issue and a challenge for all unemployed youth in South Africa, and how Parliament can make a change with that regard. Now, stay tuned. You're still watching Parliament TV on Channel 408.
South Africa's Parliament will proudly host the 11th G20 Parliamentary Speakers Summit, known as the P20, bringing together leaders from G20 national parliaments to shape global policies and reinforce parliamentary oversight in international decision-making. As the first African country to lead the P20, South Africa's Parliament is championing Africa's active participation in global governance and economic policymaking, ensuring the continent is a driving force in shaping the future we want. Parliament will play a critical oversight role, ensuring that South Africa's commitments as G20 president translate into real economic growth, job creation, and social development. The P20 summit will embed African perspectives in global decision-making, ensuring that policies on trade, technology, and governance reflect the continent's needs and aspirations. In alignment with SONA 2025's theme, harnessing parliamentary diplomacy for the realization of global solidarity, equality, and sustainability, Parliament is committed to fostering international collaboration for a better, more just world. Your Parliament, your voice, your future.
Now, we earlier alluded to the June being Youth Month in South Africa, and we have the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, Dr. Annelie Lotriet, and I cannot miss this. Dr. Annelie, I just want to know, from your perspective, how can Parliament ensure that we combat youth unemployment? We have so many graduates that are leaving institutions of higher learning but cannot find the jobs. What role does Parliament play there?
I think that is one of the greatest problems in our country, as well as a tragedy.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think we're doing our youth a disservice. And what we do have is we have a very young population, and we have to harness that. If you look at other countries such as Japan and China, very aging populations, and we're not utilizing that wonderful resource we have. So I think in terms of Parliament, we should be more vocal, more active, and not limited to once a year, a youth day, a bit of a debate, and we just ignore it. I think the youth and job creation, job opportunities should be center in most of our discussions in our portfolios. And the kind of legislation we have, the kind of economic proposals we put on the table. We have to create jobs for our youth.
Now, on to the P20. And of course, one of the Deputy Speaker's key roles is representing Parliament at global forums. And this includes this year's P20 summit. The P20 is a meeting where the speakers of parliaments from the world's biggest economies come together. Now, they talk about global issues like jobs, climate change, and how to make life better for everyone. It's a way for Parliament to have a say in solving the world's problems. Now, South Africa is hosting the summit, and this is a milestone showing how our Parliament works with other parliaments around the world and builds strong international partnerships. Now, Speaker, moving on to P20, of course. Last year, you attended and addressed a session of the 10th G20 Parliamentary Speaker Summit, where you spoke about the role of parliaments in the fight against hunger, poverty, and inequality, promoting sustainable development, of course, and global governance to address challenges of the 21st century. Explain briefly what is the P20 and why is it important for South Africa to be part of the P20 Summit?
It's a very powerful platform, and I don't think many people know that there is something like a P20. We focus on the G20. Now, the P20 is linked to the G20, and you have a different host every year. So last year it was Brazil, this year is South Africa, next year it is the US. So it's a wonderful privilege and opportunity for us, and this is where the speakers of the different G20 and some other countries that have been invited get together and we discuss these critical issues. But I think what is also important, and that we will focus on as well, is through parliamentary diplomacy, that we not only get to talking about it, but that we also get to our parliaments and say, well, these decisions, these commitments made at, for example, a G20, how do we take it through our parliaments to really enact it and make sure that it does have an effect in the country? Because otherwise it basically remains talk shops. So I hope our P20 will be able to do that.
And of course, the theme then is harnessing parliamentary diplomacy for the realization of global solidarity, equality, and sustainability. Can you unpack the theme and the relevance of it, especially with regards to South Africa and the continent at large?
Yes, if you mention the continent, this is now the first time the P20 is on the African continent, which is wonderful. So we really have to make an impact. And if you look at the themes we are looking at, that's the overarching theme. So within that, we are going to focus on different working sessions, very much focused on African situations, African issues. So we will be looking at managing risks, if we look at climate change and within the African situation, because we experience the result of climate change, but we are totally underfunded. So that will be a topic. We will look at debt, debt sustainability, all those things, because it has a real impact on countries in Africa. Our minerals, we are so rich with minerals, our critical minerals, but the problem is that we don't beneficiate it. We don't get the advantage of all those things. So those are topics within sustainability and equality that we have to address. So the overarching theme is quite broad, and then we have the sub-themes. And that is what we will be focusing on Africa.
Yes. And now, what is being done then to improve transparency and encourage more meaningful public participation in platforms such as P20, especially from communities that feel excluded or unheard by Parliament?
We've been doing this since the beginning of the year during our planning. So we have different platforms. There are debates in the different legislatures. We had a debate in Parliament yesterday. In the NCOP, we had the Africa Day, where members of public can also listen. So there are a variety of things that we are doing you can't really include the public in a physical situation, but we try to promote the idea and the different themes and to make people aware of the importance of, well, the G20 on the one hand, but very much so the P20, to show how parliaments work for people and specifically in the things that really matter to them.
And of course, then the question is, and I think it's on everybody's mind, why should I be interested? You know, as a South African, as an African, why should I be interested in the P20?
I think because it's the first time in Africa, it puts us in the global sphere.
Yeah.
It really shows that we have a place. I think for very long, the African continent have just been ignored. We've just been a place to use our resources. Whereas now we play a very dominant role. And I think it's our time now to really make our mark.
And with that then, Deputy Speaker, now Parliament established the G20 Parliamentary Speakers Summit, the technical task team, right? Now, they're responsible for overseeing the implementation of the P20 project and facilitating collaboration among political parties. Can you provide some of the behind-the-scenes insights, right, on the work of the task team?
Yes, you know, putting up a P20 summit is a lot of work. So it's a whole team. So yes, we look at everything from the logistical arrangements.
Okay.
You have things such accommodation, the venue. You have, we're sitting in a studio, sound.
Yes,
all those technical things you have to look at. You have to look at a website. You have to look at the budget, transport, security. That's besides the actual program
itself,
that we have to look at, the content, the declaration that will be there. So it's a variety of things and dealing with all the international role players.
Yeah.
So yes, the technical task team meets every 2 weeks so that we can go through this and provide inputs and monitor our progress. And I must say that we're going well.
And what do you personally hope for from the 11th P20?
Well, I hope it will be well attended.
Okay.
I do hope that we will get to that point, as I said earlier, that we devise ways that we can make the decisions taken by world leaders to be practical and implemented. I really hope that will be our contribution to the P20.
Deputy Speaker, final words to South Africans, those that feel that government has probably failed them, those that are facing challenges, social challenges, poverty, unemployment, those that feel that Parliament is just, it's there, you know, it's an institution that is said to be for us, but we can't really reach it. Any final words for those people that have sort of lost hope in the governance of our country?
Yes, I'm very aware of the fact, and that's the reality, that people have lost hope to a large extent. We see it in the turnout at elections. But I think the commitment of most members is there to make a difference. And I think it is our duty in Parliament. We have to do that by enhancing our public participation processes, our reaching out to communities, bringing the issues of the communities to Parliament. We can change that. Obviously, it is a process and it takes commitment. But all that I can do is give my commitment to the fact that we are trying our best to bring the people's issues to Parliament.
Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Annelie Lotriet.
My pleasure.
And that's all we have time for today. And it has been a pleasure to interview the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, Dr. Annelie Lotriet, and a pleasure of hosting you, fellow South Africans, as we navigate and overcome challenges and become active and involved citizens of the Republic. Now, stay informed about the work of Parliament and your representatives by visiting Parliament's website at www.parliament.gov.za and follow, like, and subscribe on all our social media platforms at Parliament of RSA. It is, after all, your Parliament, your voice, your future. Now, from myself, Tepo Mori, and the team behind the scenes, take care.